The Gilded Steer was a sanctuary of hushed power, a place where fortunes were made and unmade over porterhouse steaks and glasses of scotch that cost more than a young woman's weekly rent. The air, thick with the scent of seared beef, old leather, and ambition, was a suffocating perfume to Clara Mayhew. For her, it was just Tuesday, another 8-hour shift of balancing blistering hot plates, refilling water glasses for men who never looked her in the eye, and calculating the dwindling possibility of saving her family's bookstore. Terror, when it arrived, didn't ring a bell. It kicked the door in, but the two men who stormed into the restaurant, their faces obscured by dark knit beanies, didn't see a 22-year-old waitress drowning in debt. The terrified patrons, diving under linen-draped tables, didn't see the art history major with a near-photographic memory for detail. They saw a girl in a black apron, a lamb for the slaughter. But one man saw it all. In the darkest corner booth, nursing a single glass of bourbon, sat Julian Croft, a corporate phantom, a billionaire known for dismantling corrupt companies with surgical precision. He saw the girl's hands didn't tremble. He saw her eyes wide, not with fear, but with an unnerving analytical focus. He witnessed her impossible stillness in the heart of chaos. And what he did next wasn't an act of charity. It was an acquisition. He was about to make the most unconventional investment of his life, sparking a chain of events that would expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest echelons of his own empire. The low hum of the Gilded Steer was a carefully composed symphony. The clink of heavy silverware on porcelain, the murmur of confidential deals, the sigh of a wine cork being eased from a bottle. It was the soundtrack of Julian Croft's world, a world he had built and now presided over with a weary cynicism. To the other diners, he was just another shadow in a flawlessly tailored suit, his face a mask of granite indifference. The watch on his wrist, a vintage Audemars Piguet, was a quiet statement of power, worth more than every car in the valet lot combined. Julian Croft didn't just build companies, he purged them. Croft Holdings was the firm other corporations called when the rot had set in, when fraud and corruption threatened to collapse them from within. Julian was the cleaner, the corporate exorcist, with a legendary ability to spot the lie in a balance sheet, the tell in a CEO's nervous twitch. And he was profoundly, achingly tired of it. He came to this restaurant not for the food, which he barely tasted, but for the observation. It was a human terrarium, a place to study the predators in their natural habitat. Tonight, his gaze swept the room with the detached air of a biologist, a senator laughing too loudly with a lobbyist, a tech mogul trying to impress a model half his age, a third-generation heir complaining about the char on his steak. All of them predictable, all of them boring. Then his eyes settled on the waitress, Clara Mayhew. Her uniform was crisp, a simple black dress and a starched white apron, but he noticed the subtle wear on the cuff of her sleeve, the way her polished black flats were scuffed at the toes. She moved with a liquid efficiency that spoke of exhaustion held at bay by sheer force of will. There was a smudge of ink on her right thumb, and beneath her clear, intelligent eyes were the faint, bruised shadows of sleepless nights. Her mind was a ledger of a different sort. Table 7 needs more bread. The man at the bar is ready for his check. Dad's prescription needs to be picked up by 9. The final demand from the paper supplier was on the counter this morning. Another $2,800. Where would that come from? The Mayhew and Son bookstore was her family's legacy, a dusty, magical place that was bleeding money. Her father, a man whose heart was bigger than his business sense, was being crushed by the weight of it, his health failing with every overdue bill. Clara had put her art history degree on hold, trading dusty archives and Renaissance paintings for steak temperatures and endless coffee refills. Every dollar she earned from this world of casual opulence went to prop up her own world of quiet desperation. The irony was a constant, bitter companion. Julian watched her, a flicker of professional interest cutting through his ennui. It wasn't just her efficiency, it was her attention to detail. She noticed the senator's water glass was low before he did. She subtly repositioned a candle on a table to prevent the wax from dripping on a woman's silk blouse. She was anticipating problems before they arose. She wasn't just serving, she was managing. He saw her pause for a fraction of a second to admire the intricate design on an elderly woman's cameo brooch, a small, genuine smile touching her lips before she returned to her duties. A flash of a different person, a scholar hidden beneath the servant's apron. He was about to turn back to his bourbon to dismiss her as a mildly interesting anomaly when the heavy oak doors of the restaurant burst inward. They were not clumsy thugs. They moved with a chilling, practiced silence. Two men, their features lost in the shadows of their beanies, their bodies clad in dark work jackets. The first man held a matte black handgun, holding it with a steady, two-handed grip that spoke of training. The second man carried a heavy canvas bag. "Nobody move!" The gunman's voice was a low, controlled growl, not a panicked shout. "Phones on the table, face down!" The symphony of the restaurant shattered. A woman gasped. A steak knife clattered to the floor. Fear, cold and immediate, descended like a shroud. This wasn't the frantic, desperate energy of a common smash and grab. This was professional. The second man didn't go for the cash register. He moved directly toward a table in the center of the room, where a well-known hedge fund manager, a man named Sterling, was dining with an associate. The briefcase, Sterling. Now, Julian Croft's mind went into its familiar, analytical mode. Organized, targeted. Not a robbery, an extraction. The weapon is a Glock 19. They know who their target is. Minimal violence, maximum efficiency. He instinctively reached for the custom button under his table, a silent alarm that would summon his private security team in minutes. But his hand stopped. He was watching Clara. She had been halfway to the kitchen, a tray of dirty dishes balanced on one hand. The gunman was directly in her path. She was trapped. She did not scream. She did not drop the tray. With a slowness that was hypnotic, she bent her knees, placing the heavy tray silently on the floor. The sound of porcelain gently touching carpet was the only noise in the petrified room. She straightened up, raising her hands slowly to shoulder height, palms open. "Okay," she said. Her voice was shockingly calm, a quiet island in the sea of terror. It was the same tone she used to inform a customer they were out of the sea bass. "Everyone just do as they say. It's okay." Her eyes were fixed on the robbers, but she wasn't just looking at them. She was studying them. Julian saw her gaze flicker from the gun to the man's hands, to his jacket, to his partner. She was absorbing details, cataloging information. At the center table, Sterling, pale and trembling, handed over his leather briefcase. The second man snatched it, unzipped it, and checked the contents with a quick, professional glance before slinging the bag over his shoulder. "Let's go," the gunman said, backing toward the door, his weapon still scanning the room. His eyes passed over Clara. He seemed almost confused by her lack of hysteria. It was as if she were a malfunction in his carefully planned operation. As he reached the door, he made a small, almost imperceptible gesture to his partner with his left hand, a quick tap of his index finger against his thumb twice. It was a signal. It meant something. And Julian knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that Clara had seen it too. He saw her eyes narrow for a fraction of a second, committing it to memory. Then they were gone, vanishing into the New York night. The room exploded into a cacophony of relieved sobs and panicked chatter. The manager rushed to lock the door and call the police. Sterling, the hedge fund manager, was slumped in his chair, ashen-faced. And through it all, Clara moved. She went first to the elderly woman with the cameo brooch, kneeling by her side and speaking in a low, soothing voice. She brought a glass of water to a man who looked like he was about to faint. She was restoring order, a quiet beacon of competence in the chaotic aftermath. Julian Croft remained in his booth, the silent alarm under the table untouched. He had witnessed something extraordinary. He had seen investment bankers, men who gambled with billions, break down under the pressure of a market downturn. He had seen generals falter. This young waitress, with nothing to her name, had faced a professional armed crew with more composure than any of them. It wasn't bravery born of ignorance. It was control. It was an astonishing display of the one quality he valued above all others: grace under extreme pressure. True steel. The police arrived, their sirens a disruptive intrusion into the now contained crisis. Statements were taken. The procedural hum of an investigation replaced the panic. Clara, her face now visibly pale as the adrenaline began to recede, finally came to Julian's table. Her hands shook just slightly as she placed the check on the dark wood. "I am so sorry for the disruption, sir," she said, her voice a little hoarse. "There's no charge for your drink, of course." Julian looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the frayed cuff, the ink smudge, and the unshakable core of resilience that lay beneath. He ignored the check. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit coat and withdrew a slim, black wallet. From it, he pulled a stack of pristine $100 bills. He counted out 50 of them. $5,000. He took his business card, a stark, heavyweight piece of cardstock with only his name, Julian Croft, and a private number engraved in minimalist font, and tucked it under the crisp top bill. He placed the stack on the table. "That wasn't fearlessness," he said, his voice a low rasp that commanded attention. "That was observation. You see things. Most people just look." Before the stunned Clara could form a response, he stood and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a pile of money that could temporarily save her family, and a small black card that held the power to either destroy her world or offer her a new one entirely. The wail of sirens faded, replaced by the clatter of Clara's own hands as she mechanically cleared tables, her mind a million miles away. The gilded steer was slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy, but for Clara, the world had tilted on its axis. $5,000. The stack of bills in her apron pocket felt both impossibly heavy and blessedly light. It was a miracle, a shocking, unbelievable miracle. It was the paper supplier's final demand, paid in full. It was the new medication her father's doctor had recommended. It was 2 months' mortgage on the bookstore. It was a gasp of oxygen in a life spent underwater. Her manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Davies, pulled her aside. "Are you all right, Clara? You were incredible." "I'm fine," she lied, her hand instinctively touching the cash in her pocket. "And that man in the corner? Did he really leave you that?" He gestured vaguely, his eyes wide. "It was generous," Clara managed, the understatement of the century. She scooped up the money in the card, stuffing them deep into her purse. The card felt different from the cash. The money was a solution. The card felt like a question. The rest of her shift passed in a daze. She gave her statement to a detective, her voice clear and precise as she recounted the events. While others offered vague descriptions of panic, Clara gave details. The first man, the gunman, was approximately 6 feet tall, solid build. He wore a dark green work jacket, a brand like Carhartt. He held the gun with a Weaver stance, professional. The second man was shorter, maybe 5'10". He had a slight limp in his left leg. She paused, then added, "Just before he left, the gunman made a hand signal to his partner. He tapped his index finger to his thumb, twice." The detective looked up from his notepad, intrigued. "A hand signal? Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Clara said. It was the kind of detail she was trained to see. A small gesture imbued with meaning, like the placement of a saint's hands in a Caravaggio painting. When she finally left the restaurant, the cold night air felt sharp and real. Back in her tiny apartment above a laundromat, the reality of the night and the bizarre gift crashed over her. She spread the $50 bills on her worn kitchen table, half expecting them to dissolve. They were real, and so was the card. Julian Croft. The name was a thunderclap. She didn't need to Google it. Julian Croft was a legend, a creature of myth in the financial world. The corporate undertaker. A man who bought failing giants not to save them, but to strip them of their corrupt leadership and sell the clean bones for a profit. He was brilliant, reclusive, and famously ruthless. He was the man from the corner booth. Why? The question pounded in her head. A $5,000 tip was an eccentric whim for a man like that. But the card with a private number was something else. It was an invitation. Men like Julian Croft didn't issue invitations without a purpose. Every move was a calculation. The money wasn't a gift, it was an ante. The card was the call to play. What game, she had no idea, but she knew the stakes were higher than she could possibly imagine. For 3 days, she lived in a state of suspended animation. She paid the paper supplier, the relief so intense it made her weep. She filled her father's prescription and made an appointment with the specialist. The money worked its magic, patching the holes in their sinking ship. But the card sat on her counter, a black rectangle of possibility and dread. "He saw something in you, Clara," her father said when she told him the story, omitting the staggering amount of the tip. He sat in his favorite worn armchair in the back office of the bookstore, the smell of old paper and ink a comforting cloak. People who are truly powerful don't look for resumes. They look for character. His words, meant to be encouraging, only amplified her anxiety. What could a man like Julian Croft possibly want with her character? Was it a test? A game? On the fourth morning, fueled by a mixture of desperation and a potent, terrifying curiosity, she dialed the number. She expected an assistant, a series of automated prompts. A man's voice answered on the first ring. Croft. It was him, the same low, gravelly voice. No hello? Just the clipped assertion of his identity. Clara's mouth went dry. "Mr. Croft, my name is Clara Mayhew, from the Gilded Steer." A beat of silence stretched, a vacuum in which she felt herself being weighed and measured. "I know who you are, Ms. Mayhew. I was wondering if you would call. I am not a man who enjoys being wrong." "Wrong about what?" "My judgment. I judged you to be decisive. 3 days is not decisive." Clara felt a spark of defiance. 3 days is practical, Mr. Croft. I had urgent family matters to attend to with your very generous tip. Some of us have to triage our lives before we can respond to mysterious invitations. There was another pause. This time she could have sworn she heard the ghost of a chuckle on the line. Fair enough. Triage. An interesting choice of words. Croft Holdings, 1 Bryant Park, 95th floor. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Do not be late. The line went dead. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The next morning, Clara stood before the crystalline tower that housed Croft Holdings, feeling like an ant at the base of a mountain. She wore her one good suit, a charcoal gray outfit she'd bought for a scholarship interview and hadn't worn since. As she ascended in the silent, high-speed elevator, her ears popping, she felt like she was leaving her own world behind. The 95th floor was an exercise in minimalist power. Concrete floors, walls of glass, and a silence so profound it felt louder than the city below. A receptionist who looked like she'd been carved from ice directed her toward a massive steel door. Julian Croft's office was a throne room with a view. A single wall of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the entirety of Manhattan. The desk was a massive slab of reclaimed wood, bare except for a single monitor and a small, abstract metal sculpture. Croft stood by the window, his back to her. "Ms. Mayhew," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. He turned. In the bright morning light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. "Punctuality, the foundation of all competence." He gestured to a single leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit." She sat, her back ramrod straight. "I am going to be direct, because I find all other forms of communication to be a waste of time," he began, taking his seat. The $5,000 was a down payment. "A down payment for what?" "Your services. In that restaurant, while everyone else was consumed by panic, you were processing information. You were assessing the threat, noting details. That is not a common skill. It is, in fact, incredibly rare, and it is the single most valuable asset in my world." He leaned forward, his gray eyes pinning her in place. "My business is finding the rot in seemingly healthy companies. The official reports, the balance sheets, they are useless. They are designed to hide the truth. The truth is found in the details others miss. A tremor in a CFO's voice, a file that is too organized, a hand signal between two supposed strangers. Clara's breath hitched. He had seen it too. "I have an opening," he continued. "It is not a traditional position. You will have no title on your business card other than your name. You will report only to me. Your job will be to serve as my eyes and ears. You will go into companies I am assessing, and you will simply watch. You will talk to people. You will look at things. You will use the same skills you used in that restaurant to find the truth that is hiding in plain sight. You will be my internal auditor of character." It was the most absurd, audacious job offer she had ever imagined. "Mr. Croft, I'm an art history student. I'm a waitress. I know nothing about corporate finance." "I have rooms full of people who know about finance. They are the ones who consistently miss the point," he countered dismissively. "You know how to look at a painting and determine a forgery by a single anachronistic brushstroke. You know how to discern intent and narrative from a collection of symbols. A corporation is no different. It is a canvas, often painted over with layers of lies. I need someone who can see the original sketch underneath. Your resume is your mind. Nothing else is relevant." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was an offer letter. The salary printed on it made her feel dizzy. It was a number that would not just solve her problems, but erase them from existence. Full medical and dental for her and her parents. A housing stipend. It was a key to a different life. "This is... why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A shadow passed over Julian's face, a flicker of something old and bitter. "Because 6 years ago, I put my trust in the numbers, in the Ivy League MBAs, and in a man I thought was loyal. I missed the human element, his quiet desperation, his subtle deceptions. His corruption cost hundreds of people their pensions and destroyed a company that had taken a family a century to build. I will not make that mistake again. I am looking for someone immune to the usual seductions of this world. Your loyalty will be to the truth, and to me. Exclusively." His tone hardened. "This will not be easy. People in this building, powerful people, will resent you. They will see you as a curiosity, a pet project. They will try to undermine you. If you fail, if your judgment is flawed even once, you are gone. No second chances." He stood, the audience concluded. "I require your answer now." Clara looked at the offer letter, a piece of paper that represented an escape route from a life of quiet panic. She thought of her father, of the bookstore, of the constant, grinding weight of debt. This man wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a weapon, a chance to fight back with the only skill she truly possessed. She met his gaze, and for the first time she did not feel like a waitress. She felt like his equal. "I accept, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice finding the same calm, steady register it had in the restaurant. "When do I start?" A rare, thin smile touched Julian Croft's lips. "You already have. Your first assignment is waiting on your new desk. Welcome to the 95th floor, Ms. Mayhew." Clara's new office was a glass box in the sky, a silent, sterile space that felt more like an observation deck than a place of work. It was situated near Julian's own, a clear and deliberate statement of her new status that did nothing to endear her to the floor's other inhabitants. The whispers started on day one, subtle as the hum of the air conditioning. "The waitress." Croft hired her on a whim, they say, saw her in a restaurant. "My nephew has a doctorate in economics from Cambridge and can't get a call back." Her main antagonist was not a whisper, but a finely tailored, walking embodiment of corporate privilege named Marcus Thorne. As the executive vice president of acquisitions, Marcus was Julian's ostensible right-hand man. A man with a dazzling resume, perfect teeth, and the predatory grace of a leopard. He saw Clara not as a colleague, but as an aberration, an insult to the natural order of things. "Clara, a pleasure," he said, gliding into her office on her second day, his smile a masterpiece of insincerity. "Marcus Thorne, I handle the M&A division. Just wanted to welcome you aboard the flagship." He surveyed her Spartan office with an amused air. "Quite the view. Julian certainly has a flair for the dramatic. Let me know if you need anything at all. A guide to the corporate lexicon, perhaps. Don't want you confusing your debentures with your dividends." "Thank you, Marcus. I'm a fast reader," Clara replied, her tone level, not giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. She knew his type. He was a bully who used charm as his primary weapon. She spent the first week in a self-imposed quarantine, reading. Julian had given her access to the Croft Holdings archives, a digital mountain of past deals, failed ventures, and internal investigations. She wasn't just reading the final reports. She was reading the raw data, the preliminary interviews, the discarded notes in the margins. She was learning the company's language, not of finance, but of its past mistakes and triumphs. She was studying the brushstrokes of Julian Croft's empire. Her first real test arrived not in a file, but as a summons. Julian called her into his office. On the large screen behind his desk was the logo of a company, Viridian Press. Viridian Press, Julian said, his voice flat. A family-owned, 100-year-old publishing house. They specialize in academic texts and classic literature. They are on the verge of bankruptcy. We have an opportunity to acquire them. Clara felt a pang. It was a story achingly similar to her own family's. Marcus has been handling the preliminary due diligence, Julian continued, a subtle edge to his voice. He recommends a full acquisition. He says the company is clean, just poorly managed. A passion project we can easily turn around. He turned from the screen to look directly at her. I don't believe him. Clara blinked. You don't believe your head of acquisitions? Marcus sees a balance sheet. He sees an undervalued asset, Julian said, his voice dropping. I see a family legacy on the verge of extinction. That makes people do complicated things. His report is too neat, too simple. I want you to go there. Not as a representative of Croft Holdings. I've arranged for you to have a short-term intern position in their archives, cataloging old manuscripts. A plausible cover for an art history student. Go inside, look around, talk to people. Tell me what Marcus missed. It was a direct challenge to his top lieutenant, a test of her abilities, and a clear signal to Marcus that he was under scrutiny. The next day, Clara walked into Viridian Press. The building smelled of aging paper, ink, and decaying glue, the scent of her childhood. The offices were worn, the furniture a collection of mismatched pieces from different decades. It felt less like a corporation and more like a dusty, sprawling library. She was introduced as a student intern and shown to the archives, a temperature-controlled room in the basement filled with metal shelves groaning under the weight of literary history. For 2 days, she did the job she was assigned, carefully cataloging first editions and author correspondence. But she was watching. She listened to the quiet gossip of the older employees, women who had been there for 30 years. They spoke of the founder's grandson, Mr. Alcott, a sad, overwhelmed man who was trying to keep the company afloat. They spoke of the company's pride, a small, priceless collection of original, handwritten manuscripts from some of the 20th century's greatest authors. On the 3rd day, she struck up a conversation with the head archivist, a woman named Eleanor with kind eyes and a deep love for the book she curated. It must be incredible to be the guardian of such treasures, Clara said, gesturing to the shelves. I read about the manuscript collection. Hemingway, Faulkner. Eleanor's smile tightened. We are very proud of our history, but things get misplaced over time. Misplaced? Clara asked gently. Eleanor hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She led Clara to a specific section of the archive. This is where the crown jewels were kept. The Faulkner manuscript, a signed first edition of The Sun Also Rises, with notes from Hemingway to his editor. They're gone. Gone where? Mr. Alcott said he moved them to a more secure bank vault a few months ago, before the talk of a sale began. Eleanor whispered, her voice laced with doubt. But he was so shifty about it. We have a detailed insurance manifest. A few of us who have been here for years, we looked at it. Several of the most valuable pieces are no longer on the list. It's as if they never existed. When we asked Mr. Alcott, he became very angry, told us to mind our own business. Clara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was the rot Julian was looking for. The company wasn't just failing, it was being hollowed out from the inside. Someone was stealing its most valuable assets before the sale. That evening, Clara dug into the visitor logs for Viridian Press for the past 6 months, a public record she accessed through a city database. She cross-referenced the names against known associates of Mr. Alcott. Nothing. Then she had another idea. She searched for corporate services, transport, security, art handling, that had been paid by Viridian. She found one invoice from a high-end art and document transport company for a service rendered 3 months ago. The destination was listed only as a private storage facility. The invoice had been approved and paid not by Mr. Alcott, but by the acquisitions consultant who had been advising him on the sale, a man who had a fiduciary duty to protect the company's assets. Clara pulled up the file on the consulting firm. Her eyes scanned the list of senior partners, and then she saw it, a name that made the air leave her lungs. The lead consultant on the Viridian Press deal, the man advising Mr. Alcott, was Marcus Thorne's brother-in-law. This wasn't just a simple case of a desperate owner selling off assets. This was a conspiracy. Marcus wasn't recommending a passion project. He was knowingly pushing for the acquisition of a company that his own family was helping to loot, planning to buy the empty shell at a discount. But she still needed the final irrefutable link. She needed to connect the theft to the restaurant. The memory of the gunman's hand signal, the double tap of finger to thumb, had been nagging at her. It was too specific. It wasn't random. It was a code. Working on a hunch, she dove into a far more obscure archive, online forums for ex-military and private security contractors. She searched for slang, gestures, and nonverbal signals. It took her hours sifting through pages of jargon. Then she found it. The gesture, a variation of a signal used by certain private extraction teams, was a simple code. It meant target acquired, clean exit. The robbery at the Gilded Steer wasn't a robbery. It was a targeted extraction. Sterling, the hedge fund manager, hadn't just lost a briefcase full of papers. He'd had something stolen by professionals. Clara's mind raced, connecting the disparate threads. What if Sterling was a rival bidder for Viridian Press? What if he had uncovered evidence of Marcus's scheme, and the robbery was staged to steal that evidence before he could expose it? She pulled up the news reports from the day after the incident. Sterling's company had issued a statement about a minor security breach, but had refused to comment further. However, one financial blog had speculated that Sterling had been on the verge of launching a hostile takeover of a small, unnamed publishing house. It all clicked into place. The robbery, the stolen manuscripts, Marcus's glowing recommendation. It was all one seamless, corrupt operation. Marcus hadn't just missed the details. He had orchestrated the entire lie. Clara sat back in her chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating her face. She looked at the glass walls of her office toward the distant corner where Marcus Thorne held court. He thought she was a waitress, a naive girl playing in a world she didn't understand. He had no idea she had just unraveled his entire conspiracy, using nothing more than a quiet conversation, a public record, and the memory of a gesture. The hunt was over. Now she had to set the trap. Clara knew that a direct accusation, especially against a man as entrenched as Marcus Thorne, was a fool's errand. He would bury her in corporate legalese and dismiss her as a hysterical amateur. She needed to present her case not as a theory, but as a series of undeniable interlocking facts. She needed to build a cage of evidence so strong that by the time he realized he was in it, the door would already be locked. She worked for 48 straight hours, fueled by coffee and a cold, focused anger. She compiled her findings into a presentation, laying it out like a legal argument. She didn't start with the dramatic conclusion. She started with the mundane. Financial discrepancies, inconsistencies in the asset manifest, the transport invoice signed by Marcus's brother-in-law. Each slide was a single, verifiable fact, a brick in the wall she was building around him. She requested a final acquisition meeting with Julian, and per standard procedure, she CC'd Marcus Thorne and the company's general counsel. She titled the meeting, Final Recommendation, Viridian Press Acquisition. Marcus walked into the boardroom with a confident swagger, flashing Clara a condescending smile. The big day, Clara. Don't be nervous. Just stick to the numbers I gave you, and you'll be fine. Julian entered last, his face an unreadable mask. He took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. Ms. Mayhew, the floor is yours. Clara stood, her heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drum. She took a deep breath and began. Her voice was calm, almost academic as she walked them through the initial assessment. As Mr. Thorne's preliminary report suggested, Viridian Press appears to be a fundamentally sound company suffering from mismanagement, she began, clicking to her first slide. However, a deeper analysis of the asset inventory reveals several significant anomalies. She presented the evidence of the missing manuscripts, showing the original insurance manifest next to the doctored one. Marcus shifted slightly in his seat, a flicker of annoyance on his face. A clerical error, no doubt, he interjected. An aging company with poor record-keeping. Clara didn't acknowledge him. She simply clicked to the next slide. It showed the transport company's invoice, with his brother-in-law's name clearly visible. These clerical errors were moved off-site 3 months ago in a transaction overseen by a consulting firm where your brother-in-law, Mr. Thorne, is a senior partner. The air in the room grew colder. The general counsel leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Marcus's smile had vanished, replaced by a tight, rigid line. That's a coincidence. My family's business is their own. Is it also a coincidence, Clara continued, her voice unwavering, that the primary rival bidder for Viridian was Sterling Equity, whose CEO, Mr. Sterling, was the victim of a targeted theft 2 weeks ago? She clicked again. The slide showed a news clipping about the potential hostile takeover. This is outrageous, Marcus snarled, his voice rising. You're connecting unrelated events, spinning wild conspiracy theories. This is slander. Is it? Clara asked quietly. She turned to Julian. Mr. Croft, you hired me to observe things others miss, to see the narrative hiding in the details. She looked back at Marcus, her eyes locking onto his, like a hand signal used by an armed man in a restaurant. This was it, the final piece. She clicked to her last slide. It was a stark, split-screen image. On the left was a security camera still from the lobby of the private storage facility where the manuscripts had been taken, captured the day of the transport. A man was visible in the background, speaking to the driver. His hand was raised. On the right was a digitally enhanced close-up of that hand, and on his pinky finger was a distinctive signet ring, a small, intricate carving of a griffin. The police report from the Gilded Steer noted that I was the only witness to mention the gunman's hands in detail, Clara said, her voice echoing in the silent room. I described a unique signet ring he wore, a griffin, the same ring worn by the man overseeing the transport of Viridian's stolen assets. She let the image hang in the air for a long moment. The robbery wasn't random. It was to steal Mr. Sterling's evidence against you. The Viridian deal wasn't a passion project. It was the endgame of a long-term fraud you orchestrated with your family. You weren't just recommending a bad deal, Mr. Thorne. You were trying to use Croft Holdings' money to buy the empty box from which you'd already stolen the jewels. The cage was locked. Marcus was ashen, his bravado shattered, leaving only the raw, ugly truth of his guilt. He stared at Clara, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and pure hatred. He had fatally underestimated her. He had seen a waitress, and she had been his executioner. Julian Croft had not moved a muscle throughout the entire presentation. He sat like a stone effigy, his face devoid of all emotion. Now he slowly turned his gaze from the screen to Marcus. His voice, when he finally spoke, was terrifyingly soft. Marcus, he said, the name dropping into the silence like a shard of ice. My father once told me that a man's character is not defined by his successes, but by how he handles his failures. You have not just failed, you have betrayed every principle this firm was built on. He picked up his phone and pressed a single button on his speed dial. Security. I need an escort from the main boardroom. Mr. Thorne will be leaving us. And notify the NYPD. We will be cooperating fully with their investigation into grand larceny and conspiracy. As two uniformed security guards entered the room, Marcus Thorne, the golden boy of Croft Holdings, seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. He didn't say another word. He simply allowed himself to be led away, a man erased from power in the space of 10 minutes. After he was gone, the general counsel let out a long, slow breath. My God, Julian turned to him. Begin a full, independent audit of every deal Marcus has touched in the last 5 years. I want to know where every single body is buried. He then turned his attention to Clara, who was still standing by the screen, her hands trembling slightly now that the ordeal was over. He looked at her not with gratitude, but with a profound, almost startling respect. You did not just identify a cancer, Ms. Mayhew, he said. You performed the surgery. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. The Viridian acquisition is dead, but I am buying the company anyway, with my personal funds, and you are going to run it. Clara stared at him, stunned. Run it? I don't know how to run a publishing house. You know how to find the truth, Julian said, turning back to her. You know how to value a legacy. You'll learn the rest. You will restore what was stolen, and you will make that company whole again. Your first act as president of Viridian Press will be to offer Eleanor, the archivist, a seat on the board. The story of Marcus Thorne's spectacular fall and the unlikely rise of the waitress from the Gilded Steer became a closely guarded legend within the walls of Croft Holdings. Julian, true to form, managed the crisis with brutal efficiency, cauterizing the wound before it could damage the firm's reputation. But the real story, the one that would eventually capture the public's imagination, began with a quiet act of decency. Clara, using her new authority and a portion of her staggering first bonus, didn't just write her father a check. She went back to the bookstore. She spent weeks with him, using her newfound understanding of business to restructure his debt, modernize his inventory system, and launch a website. She didn't just save the store, she helped him make it thrive. A local newspaper reporter, covering a story on small businesses surviving in the age of Amazon, interviewed Clara's father. He was so proud he couldn't help but tell the story of his brilliant daughter, the art history student who had gone to work for the mysterious Julian Croft and was now reviving a historic publishing house. The reporter, smelling a much bigger story, started digging. He connected Clara's new position to the sudden, unexplained departure of Marcus Thorne. He pieced together her hiring with the timeline of the infamous steakhouse heist. He called Julian Croft's office every day for a week, expecting a stone wall. To the entire company's astonishment, Julian agreed to a single email-based interview. When the reporter asked why he had taken such an incredible risk on a completely unknown waitress, Julian's reply was concise and devastatingly effective. The world is full of people with perfect resumes who lack integrity. It is full of experts who are blind to the obvious. I did not hire a waitress. I hired a woman with a rare talent for seeing the truth. My only regret is that I did not find her sooner. Character is the most undervalued asset in the world. I simply made a good investment. The article, headlined "The Billionaire's Analyst: How a Waitress Uncovered a Multi-million-dollar Fraud," went viral. It was a modern-day fable, a story of intelligence, integrity, and improbable triumph that resonated with millions. Clara Mayhew became an overnight symbol of hidden potential. Viridian Press, under her leadership, flourished. She launched a new imprint dedicated to discovering and publishing forgotten female authors of the past, a project that combined her historical passion with her new platform. She became a quiet force in a world she had once only served. One evening, months later, Julian Croft visited the revitalized Mayhew & Son bookstore for the first time. The store was busy, filled with people and the warm scent of books. Clara was behind the counter, talking animatedly with a customer about a rare first edition. She looked up and saw him, a quiet shadow near the history section. She walked over, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Mr. Croft, I'm surprised to see you here." "I was in the neighborhood," he said, his gaze sweeping over the bustling shop. He picked up a leather-bound copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. "You saved this place." "I had a good teacher in asset management," she replied dryly. He looked at her, the usual hardness in his eyes softened by the warm light of the store. "That day in the restaurant, I was there to observe Sterling. I suspected he was a target. I was watching the wrong person." He paused, a rare moment of introspection. "You reminded me that the most valuable thing in any room is never the person with the most power. It's the person who is paying the most attention." In that quiet bookstore, surrounded by stories of the past, a new one had reached its conclusion. It was never a story about a billionaire saving a waitress. It was the story of how a woman who was trained to see the beauty and truth in old canvases used that same skill to expose the ugliness in a modern corporation, and in doing so, rebuilt not just one legacy, but two: a century-old publisher and the cynical heart of the man who owned it. The quiet observer had become the master of her own story,